Okay, so what I'm doing is preparing some surfaces. I've got some white opaque glass. I've made up a mixture of 302, which is our glacier white enamel, 4 teaspoons of that, and then I've added 6 teaspoons of layering mix, and then I've added 3 teaspoons of our textured sand, which is a really, really fine sand. Mix that all up, and now I've poured it on to these pieces to coat them. So basically you're doing an enamel pour. And then just move that around until you coat the glass. So I am prepping 4 pieces here. So you'll mix all 3 of those up first, and then you'll add the sand at the end after everything's mixed well. And just tilt and move it. You could use any color for your base. I'm just using white just to keep everything neutral. Ivory, 307 ivory would be a good neutral base. Depending on what you're going to be painting, you may choose to change that color. Like if you were going to do something that's all sky, you might choose a lighter blue. I just wanted something. I'm just going to tap to fill in those gaps. Keep my finger here on the side so that I don't lose any of my mixture. That just helps it, kind of guides it along. See, if you touch your finger there, it just helps guide that. And you can just kind of tap to kind of fill in. And then we will clean off the edges after this dries. So just double check, make sure. I need just a little bit more right here on this edge. Okay. Then you'll let this dry before we can work on it. And like I said, you'll clean your edges prior to firing. And I found that when I'm working with the layering mix, because it hardens so fast, that if you'll take, and I'll show it later, like one of those magic erasers that you use in the kitchen, and I just tear it into a small piece, that works really, really well. Dampen it when you get ready to try to clean your edges in the back of this to remove any product. That would be my recommendation. Okay, so to get a pattern onto this piece, we've done our pour for our textured background, and this one I've got the hydrangea on. So I've taken and a pencil, put tissue paper over my pattern, took a pencil, drew my lines, and now I'm ready to transfer to the piece, which I've already done here. You can see that. You can transfer with either the watercolor markers, the Statler Tri-Plus fine liners, or in this particular background, you can use an ultrafine Sharpie. Okay? Either one will work. So I'm going to line up my corners that I've got sketched on here. So so I know exactly where I want this to be. And then you do need to go kind of back and forth and go slowly over it so that the ink has time to get through the tissue, and you're on a textured background, so you've got to give it time. You can see that there's, and all you need is a faint line, just something to guide you. It doesn't have to be exact. Both of the markers will burn off in the kiln, so just go back and forth. So what I'm doing is just kind of going back and forth over that area to make sure it transfers through. Okay, you can see that. And I happen to be doing 4 of these because there's going to be different texture. So that's why I'm showing you again how to transfer it. And then you'll have choices on your decorating, which texture you want your final outcome to be. Okay, so as you can see, just kind of go back and forth over it. Doesn't have to be exact. You can see those lines coming out. I'm just double checking. That one didn't come off quite as much, so I'm going to go back over it just to make sure. And you can always just come on here. You could just sketch your pattern on if you wanted. So I think you can see that there's quite a bit of texture. You can kind of feel it. Well, you can't feel it. Hopefully you can hear it. I think you can see it right there. You see it's kind of bumpy. So that is the textured mixture that we poured on. And you have to let this dry 24 hours. Okay. And then we'll be ready to decorate. Okay, so when I originally did this, I used a pouncer sponge to apply the stencil to this. So I've traced the background, or the hydrangea. This is what it's going to be. And I want to put a stencil in the background. So I'm going to, since I did this originally, I've come up with, I think, a better way to do it. So I'm going to use 607 ivory, and we have these stencil brushes on the website. This is the number 20. I have an 18, and I will have a smaller one soon. Make sure you have a shop towel. I'm going to load that brush, pounce it out, and then I also want to do, here's my palette so you can see. So I'm loading it, pouncing it out, and then going to my shop towel and just kind of rubbing it off so that most of the color comes off. And then when you go to the stencil, you want to use a circular motion, going right, going left, so you can load, pounce, wipe off excess. Sometimes it's hard to see where the stencil, if it gets onto the design area, I'm not real concerned about it because it's a light enough color that it's not gonna, it's not gonna make any difference. And then just work yourself around. There's a little bit that is actually on, so we need just out here. So try to go both directions. This particular stencil is one we'll have on the website. I'll link it with the videos and stuff. Okay. Circular motion to the right, to the left, load as you need it. Okay. That just assures that you get in to all the areas well. Okay, I'm going to hold it down, lift it, and you can kind of see where it is. I need a little bit right there. Now, I traced the pattern on with a water-based marker, and as you apply color to that, it's going to start bleeding and loosening up. So you may, since I transferred these, I've been using the ultrafine Sharpie marker, and that works really well. The one that I use to transfer this is the Staedtler Tri-Plus Fine Liner, which is a water-based marker. Alright, so I have several of these because I'm going to show you what it looks like with different. This is my Prisma textured sand technique, and so I want to be able to show you with different size frits on top of this when it fires what you can achieve. So I'm making multiple samples so you can see the exact same design, just with different frit sizes on top of it. Okay, so I will just go around here and try not to move my stencil like I just did, and bring these all in. And you know, you can even pounce it in a little bit. I'm trying to stay away from that leaf. Okay, just double checking everywhere that I'm going. So it's very light, subtle in the background. Right there. So just lift it up and double check yourself to make sure you're getting that background covered. Okay, so I think you can see that. So I'm going to finish these other ones and then we'll continue. So always work from light to dark. So the first green that I'm going to use is a CS661 leaf green. Shake your products. They are in a gel base, so they tend to want to congeal, and you need to shake them up well. Okay, so I am going to be using my Sumi brushes for this technique. The Sumi brushes, I have a medium and a small hair. They're a black squirrel hair. They're very soft. They're not made for brush strokes. They're made for watercolor effects or to shade, is what I designed them for many years ago, like almost 30 years ago, I believe. Because they're so soft and I wanted to achieve a China painted type look, that was one of the reasons I designed these. So I'm going to put some water out in another well, and that's just plain water. You can use distilled water if you want. If you have a lot of minerals in your water, I would use distilled water. Always wet your brush and then take the moisture out of there. Okay, make sure you can see the water there. I think you can. There we go. Okay, all right, so I'm gonna just take a little bit of water and some of that color and come over here and basically create almost like a wash of it. See how much product that brush holds? It has a lot in it. Let me scoot that a little bit closer. And then what I'm going to do is it's just like almost like a watercolor effect. So because of the texture, you can just kind of flood that wash on. And I'm just staying up on the tip, trying to keep the application as even as possible. Although uneven is okay because it's a leaf, it can be darker in some areas and lighter in others. I'm going to turn this so you can see it. And you could pull strokes in if you want it to look more textured, which I'll do when I add another color. This is just like the base. Now, just like with anything, if you put more than one coat, then it's going to be darker. But put one coat on, let it dry, and then build from there. Remember, your pattern is a guide. It's going to burn off. You don't have to worry about those lines. So if you get outside the lines, it's not a big deal. Other than if you detail, you need to make sure you follow your lines. Okay. When you're making that wash, keep it stirred up, because the color is heavier than the water and it falls to the bottom of your paint well. And I'm just using one of those bubble palettes. A lot of people call that. So you can even come up and have individual strokes for that choppy edge that's on there. Okay, so I'm going to put a little more color over here, grab some water, and stir that up. So you can see it goes a long ways. I'm going to turn it around because it'll be easier. Keep that stirred up to pull that stroke. Even though we're really not stroking, we're just laying that color on. But like I said, it allows you to do that. Okay, and then we've got one more at the top here. Now, I want a little bit of that green in the background, so I'm just going to come in here and there, and add, because we can add color over it, but I want it to be just kind of in the background. I'm going to rinse my brush. If you get more than you want on there, you can also come over, grab some with your brush, and then blot it on the paper towel. See the paper towel that's here? Make sure that camera is focused. Okay. All right, so we've got the lighter greens on. We're going to let that dry a few minutes. I'm going to start with some of the blues. I'm going to do like some blue and purple hydrangeas, and I'm going to go from light to dark. I'm going to start with 644 cornflower blue. Again, make sure you shake that really well. And I'm just going to put a couple of drops out here, maybe 4 pea size, only because you can see how what goes so far. It's not like you need to put out a whole bunch of water. Okay, so we're just going to grab some of that water, add it, grab a little bit more, and then take most of that color off of your brush. Let that fall out, because that brush holds so much. There's a ton of color on there. And then let me zoom in just a little bit closer. Okay, so you can just randomly, I'm not even going to worry about the individual patterns that I put on there, because we can fine tune that later. I'm just going to randomly put some of this color, because I'm going to have other colors that come on top of here. So I'm just kind of pushing it and dabbing it on. Now out here on the edge, yes, you would want to be careful where you're, how far you go out. Okay, so you can see it goes a long ways. If you come back and once this dries a little bit, if you come back and you add another coat, it's going to get even darker in that area. So you may want one side, like the lower side of the design, to be a little bit darker than the other areas. So I'm going to put some in there around. Okay. All right, then we're going to bump up to denim blue, which is, this is an old bottle, so CS 642. Again, shake. And I'll just put 3 or 4 drops into the next well. I'm going to rinse that color out of my brush. Grab some of my water. Bring it over. And then start adding it in some areas. And when it starts to dry, you'll be able to see the color difference. You can overlap those colors onto each other. And I think you can see on the camera that it is a little bit darker. And I'm not worried about shadows right now because I just want to get this color on, and then I'll show you. We're going to go back in and do all that. And remember, this is more of a, this is a Sumi watercolor type finish. I do this on my ceramic pieces, and you can do it on greenware, you can do it on bisque, but this one is fused glass. And I am working on 96 COE. I'm going to go ahead and put this color in all the other areas. And like I said, I am going to overlap into some of them. And you want it a little bit uneven around the edge when you get to your finished product. Let me tuck it in. So you may have some, and you could do this with a liner also, but you may just have, you know, some little random pieces that come out just kind of haphazardly, just so it's not, and it doesn't have to be everywhere, just so it's not even, and those can kind of come out on top of that leaf also. All right, let's rinse. I think you can see that okay. Okay. Let's see all the different variations of the color. Okay, I'm going to go back to that lighter blue and add just a little bit of it out there, here and there. It's like fuzzy ends of the petals. Rinse that brush, and now I'm going to grab some greens. And what I want to do is, this is vine green. This is 662. Sorry, 662 vine green. Again, it's color stroke. Now, could you do this with your color concentrates? Absolutely. I'm just trying to introduce you to some different colors. We have 61 colors in the color stroke line. And up to this point, if you're watching this, this is January of 2022. So I'm doing this new. We've not used color strokes on glass before, but because I've got this textured background, it allows me to use these on there, creating them in a softer look, and it works. These are originally made for ceramics, so, but they do have a little bit of frit in them. We are going to sift clear powdered frit over the top of this. Okay, so now what I want to show you is I'm going to have to bring my water bowl over here, and I'm going to back off the camera so that you can see the water. Okay, so what we're going to do is what I call sumi shading, and we're going to do it with that darker green, that vine green. Okay, so you water load your brush. This is the medium sumi. Water load, drag off to a point, and I'm turning the brush over, and dragging again, so that I'm removing water on all the different sides. But there's still a ton of water in here. If I were to touch this to the paper towel, watch how much, there's lots of water there. Okay? But you don't want it dripping off. So water load, drag to remove the excess. And then over here on the palette cam, you can see that I'm just tipping, just a tiny, tiny bit. Okay, just a itty bitty bit on the tip of the brush. We're going to use the water in the brush to float that color where we want it. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is tuck that color in. So I've got two leaves here that are overlapping, so I want to come in and I want to tuck this where the shadow would be behind. I've still got enough water. I'm going to just grab more color. Now the color strokes are an opaque underglaze, but because we're using it with water here, we're diluting it so much, they're very soft. Unlike the color concentrates are pretty strong and vivid in color, where these will be a little bit softer and more muted. Now, the more that you work on top of this, it's going to start moving the underneath color, okay? But you can see how you've got a shadow in there. Let it dry and then come back. Okay, again, water load, drag it, make sure you rinse that well because you've got that color all the way up. You just want it on the tip. Tip into that dark green. Tuck that color where you want it. So I'm aiming. You see I'm constantly turning my piece and I'm aiming that where I want it, and I'm pressing down and allowing that color to bleed back into the water that's on the brush. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit more color, a little bit heavier on my brush. Start in the middle, walk it to the left, and walk it to the right. So sit it down, mush, mush, mush. Walk it to the left, walk it to the right. And then I'm kind of walking it back up onto that leaf. Now, the more you work on it, it starts to dilute and move around that first color that's on there. So you've got to let it dry and move to a new area. Water load, drag off to a point, removing the excess water. Tip, I'm going to tip a little more generously on this one because I have a large leaf. And first I'm going to do is just work it at the base and up against that stem. And I should have put green on this stem also. Okay, so we'll let that dry. Water load, drag off to a point, tip into that color, tuck that in, and kind of bring it up. Okay, so this one really, so if you get too much water, you think you've got too much water, here's another way. So drag to get rid of the excess. Quickly blot on your paper towel and then grab your color so that it removes some of that water. Okay, you can always go back and take your wash of your lighter green and put some of that color back in there. We need some of this on that stem anyway, so I'm barely even touching the surface. Okay, and it's just flooding onto the area. So if you wanted, let's say we wanted another coat, like out here on some of these, I can stroke in just with the very tip of my brush. And what that's going to do is add a second coat. So it's going to intensify. So what I'm going to do is follow the direction of my veining that would be there on the leaves. You wouldn't want to cross and go across. You want to go with the grain of the leaf. Okay. So I'm going to make a little bit more of that wash on that first color. And you can take just pure color also. So I'm just going to kind of pull some strokes. It's almost like you're just barely tickling the surface and you're just dragging it to get another coat. So let's do this one over here. You're just dragging it along because that's going to cause that to be darker, heavier, a second coat. So it's definitely going to be darker. Grab some more. Okay. This one's too wet. We can't do it, but let me pull that up close, and I think you can kind of see those strokes. So you can see the individual strokes there. And you can even come back with the light green and stroke up into that, or with the dark green, which is probably what I'll end up doing. Okay, you got to watch this because you see that it's starting to run a little bit because it's sitting on the surface. So I'm just going to blot it with my brush to remove that excess, and then I'll come back to it. So I've got too much on there. Okay, that's why that is doing that. Okay, so let's go back to the flower. We can add a second coat of that darker blue here and there, and I do not want that large brush. Larger the brush, the softer the look, but I want to be able to go back into some of the smaller areas. So I'm going to mix that up really well because remember, it starts to separate from the water. Okay, move that a little bit out of the way. Okay, so I can come in here now if I want to work more on an individual pattern. You can do that. You can do the Sumi shade waterload tip in the color. Right now I'm still just using the wash. And so I'm looking for ones that I can aim down towards the center from this direction. Try not to turn. You don't get the same effect if you're trying to work backwards over your strokes. Trust me, I can tell when you've done it. And it just doesn't blend as well. So you're going to have to constantly change directions. I'm just going to pick up some on the end of that brush. Let the brush bend and do the work. I'm just tucking that in like where the center would be. And the nice thing about the Sharpie is you're able to see it as long as your colors don't get really heavy. But we're working for that soft Sumi watercolor effect. So we don't want them, we don't want the colors real heavy. And you can overlap some of them there. Don't hesitate to. It just gives you a different effect. Constantly turning. And like I said, it doesn't have to be on every single one. Even though you start going, and sometimes it's hard to stop. Okay, so you can see the different areas of color. See, that one is staying really wet, where these dried quickly. So we'll just have to come back to that. All right, so we had cornflower blue, we had denim blue. I think I'm going to add a little bit of purple. This is 637 bright purple. Now the nice thing is the color strokes, as far as your purples and pinks, they do hold better on your fused glass than the color concentrate ones. So that would be one of the reasons to use them. I'm just going to water load, drag off to a point, and tip into the pure color on this one. Okay, so I haven't diluted the color at all. And then I'm just going to come in and tuck some of that color here and there, kind of what we did before, but I'm just adding a little purple glow to it. You know, and you wouldn't even, you don't have to outline this. You can just leave it very abstract, very watercolory. And if you were going to do that, you might want to dilute the color, and then, so I'm going to get a little more free with this and just add water, drag off, touch in the color. So I'm just overlapping, because every layer you add, the darker it's going to be in that area. Maybe some on top of that green. So no two are ever going to come out, you know, alike, because you're just dabbing that color. It doesn't have to be precise. Like I said, I used to do this on bisque and greenware for ceramics. Gosh, to create all kinds of different backgrounds. So it's nice that you can do it on the fused glass and to introduce this product to you. So whereas the color concentrates, which are the shorter bottles, which are the CC enhancers in the glass world, and then these, and actually we have new bottles, they're not quite this tall because of COVID and everything. We've had to switch different manufacturers of our bottles. So these are really extremely strong. Like I said, the color strokes tend to be, they're stronger as far as ceramic wise, but when you get into the glass, because of the way I'm showing you, and you need to use them this way, you don't want to use them real solid, because there's pigment, there's also a glaze in there, and then there's a touch of clay, which technically you shouldn't be using clay. That's why you'll end up with more texture with this technique, and then the texture of our background. So I'm just going in here and I'm softening some of those edges. I could also go back and grab a little bit of that first green and dab in a little more of that. and this one is still not dry. Now, it's very hard to see the leaves, those strokes. It's there, but it is hard to see. So what I'm going to do is I water load, drag off to the point to remove the excess. I'm going to tip into that darkest green again. And now this time I'm going to pull my strokes outward for it. Okay, so I'm going to just come out with that stroke. And it's very, I mean, because I have water, the water is going down the brush and then diluting what's on the tip. So you see how I'm following, and make sure you constantly load and rinse so that you don't get that dark too far up. And I'm just going to start here because I can see the shape of that leaf, and then you can fill in above and below it. And I don't want it can skip. It is going to skip because of the texture of the sand in your mixture there. Let's add a little bit darker there. Okay, so now you can see it, and you can just keep adding layers and layers on here. It just really depends on how dark you want it. Okay, so I think I've got enough water still in the brush. So I'm just going to come here and pull out. There's my center. Okay, so let's look at that closer. Okay, so you can see those strokes. I'm pulling from the center out. Rinse again. And when you're rinsing, be careful and watch what is on your water bowl, because that color gets up there on the rim and you think you're taking the color out of your brush, and when you drag across that color, which is a watercolory look, you're actually picking it back up. So definitely make sure that you're paying attention to that. Okay. All right, so on this one, we're just going to start at the base, and I'm keeping the brush fairly upright. I'm trying to lean it back a little bit so you can see it. Those strokes can overlap. And we can come back and detail. Did you notice you can hardly see that background in there now? I can see it close here, but it is more difficult to see. So this goes pretty quick, other than if you have areas that you just need to let dry. Once the layering mix and the enamel and the textured sand is dry, 24 hours dry, it's pretty hard and you can work on it. So just be aware that it does need to dry, because otherwise it, with the layering mix, it has like a slick texture to it. So you want it as dry as possible. This is still pretty wet, but I'm going to add some to it. See if I can get a little bit pulled in here. Constantly turn your work so that it's comfortable to pull that texture or color to yourself. You wouldn't want to start out here and go in, because what that does is give you a fat area here, and you're not getting that fine point on the end. Okay, so I think you can see those. And as they dry, they get more chalky looking. So these are dry out here on the tip. They're heavier and wetter at the base. Okay, now if you wanted some of this darker color around the edges. You could do that sumi shade where you water load, drag off to a point, tip in the color, and let's just say maybe I wanted some of that dark color out here and a little bit here and here. You can definitely add that. Let it fade out. We need to add a little bit, just picking up more color, a little bit to that stem. And I made it darker here up against the flower, and then I'm just going to pull what's left in my brush down. Okay. Now, we need to probably darken the flower, and I've got my darkest color, and I'm debating whether I want to put it on here or not. I will thin it down to a wash. This is, like I said, my bottles are really old. CS 643 Dutch Blue, which is like the sapphire blue in the color concentrate. Extremely strong. Extremely strong. I'm going to switch to the medium sumi brush. Water load, and I am just going to sumi shade, so I've got water on the brush and I'm just barely picking up a tiny bit of that color, and I'm going to tuck this in at the bottom and just let itty bitty on the brush, itty bitty, let it just kind of bleed and run into those areas of the leaf, or around, so that it shadows. Let's add a little bit down here and come around. Now these are all on top, so the leaf, we can add more. We can actually add some of the purple to the leaves also. Let's add some of that on this side. So water load, drag off to a point, tip into your color, and I'm grabbing that same bright purple color, and I want a little bit of that out here. It'll kind of give it that brown tone, and maybe we want some out here also. And with the purples, because they do tend to burn out in the kiln, be a little heavier than what you would think with it for it to show up. So I'm going to go back over here and add a little bit heavier. And if I wanted, let's put some against this other one here. Rinse that out. And maybe I wanted some blue on this one, so we'll go back to the denim blue. This was the one we'd added water to it anyway, so it's kind of thinned down. So you can add. So I'm trying to grab from the bottom of the puddle, because remember the color is heavier than the water. And maybe I want a little bit here, a little bit over here. You could, and remember you can overlap these colors too. I'm going to add some of that on top of that darker green. I'm also going to kind of go to the point of the brush. Because I can kind of drag that and blend it. I think I'll leave that side, but maybe I'm going to just pick up the purple. And I'm just up on the tip. Now I'm going to rinse, and I'm going to come back with just water and soften that just by touching it with some water. Now I'll probably want some of the darker green back on there. You can also come back on top with some color concentrates to make it a little bit darker. So in your color concentrates, and I don't have the same color, but if it was 150 and it happened to be 650, they have the same pigment, just a different formula. And so you could definitely use that. You know, I've got some 32 deep cranberry. I may use that in a minute. Okay, water low, drag off to a point. I'm going to go back into that Dutch, the 643 Dutch blue, which is like your sapphire blue, and very little. I'm just going to come in here and kind of dab a little bit off to one side of this. So you can see it doesn't take much color at all. Not at all. Okay. Alright, so let me show you this. And you can kind of see that stencil if you look real hard. You can see that ivory color there. Now, when it dries, if you feel like it needs some more, you can come back and add. Now, we do need to put like some centers, but I'm going to let this dry and then I'll come back and decide whether I want to sumi shade around the design or just leave. I think I'll just leave the stencil on this one. Okay, but I'll let this dry, come back, and I'll show you how I'm going to detail it. Okay, so I'm going to add a little bit of detail to this. So what I have is the color concentrate, CC 101, cobalt black. The DB 101 is exactly the same thing. We just label it separately. But if you have either one of those, you can do it. You could do this with any color. I'm going to use the number 2 liner, the 3600 number 2. This is the Kolinsky liner. And all of these products and brushes are on the website. I'm going to add a little bit of water to one corner of that black and just thin it down. You don't want to thin the whole puddle. It's going to evaporate. You'll have to just keep rethinning it. And then I'm just dragging it through, which you can see on the palette cam, so that I get all those hairs coated, okay? And then shaping it to a point on that edge there, okay? So I always like to pull my strokes towards me. So I'm going to start with the outline of the leaves, and I'm just going to make it extremely loose, and it doesn't even have to be exact. I'm going to go down. This is just, it just gives it a little bit of structure. You could come in with that center vein if you wanted. I'm just up on the very, very tippy toes. And I'm going to come in a little bit closer so that you can see. Constantly reloading as you feel like you need it. Just very loosey-goosey, I call it. The less detail or structured you get, that way if you mess up something, it's not going to be as noticeable. And then I'm just going to lightly, and it's really hard to even see, but I am pulling down both sides of that stem. Constantly turning my work. I like to pull that brush towards me most of the time. just on the tippy toes. Now I got a little heavier over here than I did on some of the others, and I'm going to show you what I do to make that work for me. Constantly turn. Center vein. And I'm just on the very, very tippy toes. So what I need to do is to come back. Usually I do it at the end, but just kind of add a little bit heavier line here and there on some of the others. And that way that one that I did it heavy on will not stand out like a sore thumb. That's how I fix those. They'll think you meant to do it. Now, even though we've thinned this black, it still will be extremely strong. Add that extra thicker line. You can go to more detail if you want. I'm going to keep it fairly loose. Now, even though I put petals, you know, on your pattern for you, I mean, you could look at this and attempt to do something similar if you wanted, but I'm going to keep it loose, which is hard for me because I'm not used to doing loose at all. So I'm just going to kind of start in here and it could just be really, really, you give the illusion that there's a petal there. It doesn't have to be perfect by any means. And I'm barely touching. It can even just be wiggly lines even. Just have a, I'm going to go through here and put in a couple of major flowers, and then I will go back haphazardly. And now we still need to add some centers to these flowers. Got to remember to do that. And I'm not even really looking at that pattern. I was hesitant to even draw it out and put it on there, but there may be some of you that like to be exact, that wants that. Pattern on there. Okay, so I've got some major flowers in there. So just staying up on the very, very tippy toe, you can just come in here and just randomly just kind of wiggle some lines. And you definitely may want to add some out here, you know, around your edge, just to make sure that you have a some sort of an outline. Just constantly turn to work and have some of those lines going in different directions. gets to the point that sometimes it's hard to tell what is the marker and what is your liner. So you could transfer with a different color marker if you needed to. I'm going to add a few out there on those little pieces we stuck around the edge. Okay. All right, so very hit and miss. Okay, while I have the black in my brush, I'm going to go ahead and sign. I usually sign inside of a leaf. So I'm using that same brush. Just barely touching the surface. It will grab the color. It will grab it. Okay, so now we need to come back and do the little centers. So we can use some of the green. This would be the 62 green. Let's get it fresh. You can have a little bit of that 61. And there you could even do a yellow. I'm just going to kind of get a little bit of both of those on my brush and just kind of come in here. And tap some of that in just to create the illusion that we've got some centers. Just be careful and don't get too much on the tip of your brush, because you don't want it to flood on there. Okay, I like the looks of that. A little bit different than, you know, what the pattern is drawn out, because when I start sketching, then just kind of depends on how I'm going to paint it, how loose it's going to be. Hopefully, turn it this way so you can see the whole thing. Like this. Like I said, this is on 3mm white opaque glass. I will clean my edges if there's any of that base on there. Make sure you get rid of it because it will stay on there. You can take a Q-tip, paper towel, or your finger like I do. Just be careful and don't end up cutting yourself. And what I'll probably do is find a colored piece of glass and cut it. This is a 6x6. I'll cut it just like a 1/4 of an inch larger so that I have a nice frame around it. Okay? All right, I hope you enjoyed this project. And until next time, happy painting. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video, share the video, and I'll see you next time.